One concept I wanted to start with, and I don't usually make slides that I quote myself on, but this was a slide that I had used on Facebook, and I think the idea of epigenetics, epi meaning on top of genetics, is a really important one to start with. And so the idea is that for a long time we've been hearing nature versus nurture, but in reality it's nature and nurture. And so there's been some studies that have come out recently. Specifically, there was one that found the gene for violence, and so extreme violence in kids. And they found that that gene, if kids are raised in kind of a regular, non-abusive environment, never even really kind of peeks its head. And in fact, they end up being less violent. But kids that are raised in extremely violent, abusive homes, it kind of unleashes these genetics. And they're finding this with a number of things. People that are predisposed to cancer, if they have this environment, it kind of opens up those genes. People that are predisposed to diabetes, they may never get it, but in these other environments. And so the things we're talking about today, I think it's good to keep in mind that environment can kind of unlock things in the brain and in the genes that sometimes wouldn't be unlocked. And so there's kind of some best practices that anybody can be just reminding the kids and their parents of. The other thing that is just kind of a bedrock thing, and I thought I'd pick something with palm trees because it's rather chilly out, is just the idea of how brains are formed. And so in the first 5 years of life, including the in utero time, 90% of our neural pathways are developed. 90% of the brain's growth happens in that first 5 years of life. And so by the time the kids get to you, a lot of that brain development has happened. And so in our brains, there's these things called neuropathways. And so if you think of I-75 as being kind of the ideal road, which, you know, for us with potholes, that's about as good as it's going to get, that there's all these different things within our brain in regards to how it connects and how we learn. And so if there's a new behavior that wants to come in, it's almost like there's a trail that then turns into a two-track that turns into kind of a dirt road. Over time, these neural pathways have to get developed. And those old habits, they'll start to break down those I-75s. So an example might be if you have kids and every time you've said it's dinner time, they say just 5 more minutes of whatever they're doing. Their whole life, maybe you've done this habit and not realized it, and then you just get fed up with it. Their whole life, they've had this I-75 that's developed in their brain. And then you say, okay, when I say it's dinner time, I want you to start coming down. This is a new behavior I'm going to start teaching you. That's going to be kind of a dirt trail, and over time, that's going to start to build up. But then we have to wait for that old I-75 to start to break down. So that's another kind of bedrock thing that just to make sure we're all on the same page around. The next thing is sleep. So when we sleep, a lot is going on. And so the depth of sleep and also the length of sleep are kind of two very important concepts that we want to make sure we understand. There's a TED Talk that is really interesting. It's like 20 minutes long, like most TED Talks, all around sleep and mental health, and how a lot of times future mental health issues start to emerge first in sleep issues. And so one of the kind of 3 core things that mental wellness counseling we always cover first is how's your sleep, how's your eating, how's your exercise. Because if we can get those things optimally and get that environment taken care of first, then the things that are still emerging we know are kind of beyond just kind of those basic practices of idealizing how the brain can operate. So what happens at night when we go to sleep is it takes in all the different, our brain takes in all this information throughout the day. And so everything from what color shirt Will has on to something Kevin told you to something that you learned in a math class, all of that your brain kind of takes into this temporary area. And then based on the depth of sleep and the length of sleep, your brain sorts through all of those different things and says, yep, this is worth keeping, this is worth just kind of making room for. So throughout the whole night, kids and us, our brains are working through all of these different things. And so kids that don't get the right depth of sleep or the right length of sleep, which usually when kids are learning, it should be 8 to 10 hours of sleep is what we're looking for, which most of our kids probably aren't getting. They're going to remember parts of what they learned, but not the same depth of what they learned. Like just today, I was at PT and I was talking to the lady that was working on my back, and she was talking about her son's hockey schedule and how they're like 2-hour hockey games. He's 12 years old. It usually starts around 7 p.m. He's done by 9. They get home by like 9:30, 10 o'clock. He has then homework to do. He still has to shower. He hasn't eaten a whole lot except for like rink food, which is, like corn dogs and stuff. And so he gets down at like 11 o'clock, and then we're wondering why his grades might start slipping over the next year or two. There's actually a study out of Minnesota that talked about looking at kids' math grades. And they did this study where they ensured that these kids got an extra hour of sleep over, I think it was like a 2 or 3 month period of time. And they found that for every extra hour of sleep that the kids got, that they went up a grade level. So if you had a D student, they would usually become a B student if they got 2 extra hours of sleep every night. If you wanted that C student to become a B student, then it was an extra hour. If you wanted them to jump to an A, it was about 2 hours. And so I think just understanding that one of the very first questions when you see a kid struggling with what might look like learning differences, what might look like ADHD, laziness, executive functioning, depression, is how's your sleep? How's the environment of your sleep? Is it bright? Is it really warm? Because our body temperatures, need to drop in order for that sleep hormone to really kick in. And so there's things like light, temperature. Is it a chaotic home where you feel safe? All those things are going to affect the depth of sleep. And then the other kind of bedrock thing, this is my daughter, Lakin. I always like putting pictures of her in there. So she's not a tween yet, but someday she will be. Is just really looking at this age group. What are some of kind of the developmental things that we see in them? And it's just sometimes a good reminder that their brains are much different than our adult brains. And so there's a lot of black and white thinking. There's a lot of missing social cues. There's a lot of, if someone's sarcastic towards them, not understanding sometimes the differences in sarcasm or humor that we might do or even other peers might do. While also knowing that especially between now and age 22, their frontal lobe is slowly starting to develop. That's the decision-making and connecting part of your brain. That isn't fully developed, while the center part of their brain, where their emotions sit, is most magnified kind of compared to the rest of it. So that's bedrock stuff to make sure we're all on the same page around kind of the brain.